Hello friends, Anderson here, and another week has passed, which means we get to continue work on the city of Coleraine in the world of Aina, which we've created in 3 previous videos already. So if you are just joining us, feel free to catch up on those, and also feel free to like, comment and subscribe and all of that YouTube stuff. And speaking of comments, that is what I would like to start with. The rest of the episode will be dedicated to fleshing out additional factions, which are implied just by the existence of our 2 world-spanning empires and our sinister cult cabal, so their representations in this city also require some fleshing out. But first, we have gotten a bunch of ideas out of the comments, and they are a goldmine of additions to this setting, so I'll start with those. I've compiled them here into a overview that touches on a variety of topics. I'll stick it in a PDF in a video description in case you want to read it in some details. No real requirement to follow the series, but in case you don't want to read it off the screen, I figured it's easier. So we got an initial comment, quite a few actually, about our magical material. And I think we now have a pretty good definition and idea of what it could be and where it originated. So, the idea here is that this MacGuffin Unobtainium is some kind of divine essence that came into being when the gods of the old global pantheon came into existence here in this very spot where Coleraine now stands, because this was the Godlands, where the old pantheon resided, where they came into being, and where their very presence just infused the land with this material. So it's a residue of the gods' awakening here. It runs from the very mountaintops down into the ground in strains, in veins very much like ore, so it has been mined still when the gods were here, and also is currently still found out there in the wastes. But it's not just a power source, because it really came into its own only through a deity that we implied through the combination of the various ideas from the comments, which basically suggests that there used to be some kind of crafter or tinkerer deity that figured out what to do with this residual material, and that used it to create a bunch of devices that existed here in these godlands. And they were anything from amenities that made life easier and more comfortable for the gods and their direct servants and their servitor peoples that they kept in this megaplex around them that we're now perceiving as a field of ruins, laid waste to in this divine war that happened at some point where the old pantheon was slain. And those devices can be weapons as well. So it ranges from amenities to weaponry, and it was created by a tinkerer god or goddess, because that's just what gods do. It's also this material that keeps this working in the city running, so it needs constant refueling, this radiating repulsion barrier that keeps anything nasty out of the wastes from intruding into Coleraine. And we already assumed the existence of an artificer guild in the first episode just based on this working, and we can now continue to flesh that out in a way that the artificers are effectively the descendants tracing their line back to the servitors that were the sentient races that were, well, either enslaved or willingly serving, or some hybrid of the two, this tinkerer deity, this crafter deity. Because then they had the knowledge how to handle these devices, even though they didn't really know how to come up with them or create them, but the goddess had them, maintained them, fuel them, so they knew how to do these tasks, and that's where the artificers trace their line back. We also had an idea come up about the exposure to this divine essence material and what it does to people. We already defined that the background radiation of it that exists around Coleraine creates some minor mutations in people, but we now also add an element with regards to origin. So different peoples handle different reactions or different exposures to this material in different degrees of severity. Some origins are much more accustomed to handling this material because the gods, when they created the various sentients, gave them various purposes, and the ones that were made to mine and to handle this particular material are also more resilient to it, and those that weren't, and if they handle it and are exposed to it for too long, either turn into a pile of goo or into a 5-headed raging mutation that goes on a rampage. So it's a bit like Warpstone, depending on who you are, how it affects you, or it doesn't really affect you at all much if you're like a deep gnome or a certain offshoot of dwarf or whatever. That's concerning the raw material. I assume that the devices that are in use by the very rich that are procured from the ruins are shielded in some way by the artificers who know how to do that, so that some rich lord that purchases some magically fueled space heater as a show-off item doesn't mutate after 3 evenings in the warm, right? One further consequence of questioning what this MacGuffin unobtainium is that we now decided is some kind of divine essence residue was that another material was suggested, which was labeled a volcanic type of glass, and while I don't think that's what I want the MacGuffin to be, I'd still want it in my game. So I had the idea to term it blood glass and to tie it into Irugu and a former war god that perished in the death of the old pantheon. So basically what happens is final battle, final stand of the gods, the invading sentients come here with the minor gods, they bring down this god of war, mountaintops shatter, lava erupts, the god's blood is lava, everything just turns into fire, and this pastoral serene place that previously maybe existed here as the divine land, part of it turned into this volcanic wasteland, and then this cooling mixture of the last blood of the war god and the divine essence turned into a different material, into a material like volcanic glass, which is called blood glass, and it's a very precious material for weapons, or in even rarer cases armor, and it can only be found in the mountain ranges, volcanoes around Coleraine. And as an extension of that, we also decided that Irugu and the cult of Irugu tie into this blood glass, because Irugu used to be a general in the forces of the war god. We still don't know what Irugu actually is, we only have a name and that it's somehow important, but we know it has a cult that brings it back, and we assume maybe the cult ultimately wants to bring that war god back. Maybe we also assume that the cult is somehow related to our cult cabal, which we think wants to bring either all of the old pantheon back or some of them, because I still think of them as like the offshoot of the old priesthood that worshipped and represented this old pantheon, this global spanning pantheon. And so the cult of Irugu is a war cult that revived Irugu, wants to get their war god back, and they wield blood glass weapons, and some of them even bear blood glass armor, so they're not to be trifled with, which also makes the blood glass a lot harder to obtain, because if you go into the area where it is, you will likely run into heavily armed, crazy war god cultists. A further extension of our MacGuffin divine essence and the extrapolation of the Tinkerer deity is the Tinkerer God's Workshop, because that, I assume, is the underground megastructure that collapsed. So the Tinkerer God had a above ground workshop with massive underground levels and workshops where the sentients that worked for the Tinkerer God were kept and working in tunnels and caverns, and nobody knows how deep it goes. And when the god fell, it blew up and it created the pit, but the tunnels go deeper, they're still there. So if you build a house in Coleraine and you dig a little too deep, you maybe open up an old tunnel and all of a sudden some automaton or some strange mutated creature comes rushing out, and that's kind of the risk you have when you get into real estate in Coleraine. So basically our pit is the remnant of the workshop, and it still also just sits on top of all these tunnels that are now mostly sealed off, but occasionally there will be a breakthrough and then something chaotic might happen. So, fun times. Additionally, we had some thoughts and feedback on the strong arm of the Raja, the foundation of our government, of our Darajan assemblage. this sort of temple order that sits sequestered in their monasteries, and if ever unrest really breaks out, the gates open and then all hell breaks loose, or heaven, depending on your interpretation. And it also raised the question of Daraja. Where did she come from? What cultural influences can we derive from her? The name sort of goes in direction with this almost like Indian subcontinent theme that we drew on for the prosperity of Chandra, the decadent empire. And so one thing led to another. The idea is that Daraja was from that continent before that decadent empire existed, and that part of that influence mingled with other influences here in Coleraine. And so this temple order is quite an eclectically looking mix, with plate and chain armor, a classic tabard, but also more like vibrantly colored loose pants or even loose skirts, and a turban or other headscarf wrapped around their male coifs. Is that how you say it? Coifs? I don't know. And they have curved swords and knives and things. So it's a mixture of, like, we don't picture classic knights in armor, we don't picture classic anything really, we picture a wild mixture, like with so many things in this city. That's exactly how it should be. That was very much in the spirit of things. Lastly, we briefly touched on Jezebeth, our tiefling string puller behind our black marketeers, and we suspect that her string pulling also extends to the rebellious high noble that is currently generating opposition against the surrogate, the leader of the Darajan assemblage, the local government. It really fits with the shadowy spider character in the background. It's not that likely that she herself is the rebellious noble, because that's too exposed, but controlling the noble from the shadows is very much on brand. We just don't really know yet why she does it. Maybe we'll find out during play. Either it's to keep the city destabilized and nicely distracted so her illicit dealings can be covered more easily, or maybe she serves the prosperity of Chandra and wants to destabilize the city so she can have them swoop in as the saviors to address this instability and finally bring it into the fold. We don't know. All of that from the comments, so thank you very much for that, and definitely keep them coming, because this really feels like now we're building this together and it's so much fun. I'm really looking forward to playing this now. I think we have another 1 or 2 extra sessions to go through to generate the entirety of this. We still need to flesh out 3 factions, the faction histories and relationships, and also some of the more local history of the city. So I think probably this 1 and 2 more, or 1 more, depending. Also, I put out a call for random table books, and I also put that call out on Reddit, and I got quite a resonant response. First off, I was pointed at Maze Rats by Steve Morrison of Errant Adventures, who uses this in his current series, and I had a look at it, and I will definitely use this during play and also during creation of NPCs now that we do. I've also created a bit of a custom table for a D100 roll that includes then a section at 95 to 100 where we veer off into Maze Rats and just generate a custom kind of origin out of these sets of tables herein, because you can basically just create your own NPC type. Additionally, I got a hold of the Ultimate Toolbox, I think it's called, and I printed out a few pages of villainous names, evil priest names, evil rogue names, evil dragon names, some village names, some very specific road names, city names, all kinds of names that really closes the gap quite nicely and add some variety to the books of random tables. And, well, our actual random table is an adaptation of a Reddit post by user Bingo Brongo, which combines a bunch of D&D sources into a random table. I adapted it, I added some different biases, and I added a few origins that weren't there originally and renamed a few, so we have a whole gamut of possible denizens. I think I want to still diversify it a little bit, but this is workable for the beginning. So that's already a lot of fine details and additions to our setting. Now it's time for a few more broad strokes again. We already have the Darajan assemblage, criminal black marketeers, and this magic resource controlling guild. And we know that we still need the Chandran Embassy, the Embassy of the Elonate Commonwealth, and the Cult Cabal of the Dead Gods and their representatives here to flesh out. And I think as we have an option here for aristocratic courts as factions, this might work quite well for the two embassies, and it gives us something of an idea of who the representatives of the two major players in the world here in Coleraine are. And I think it can be completely off theme to some extent of the actual empire, because it's a remote embassy, an important one, but being in Coleraine opens up some possibilities of this being somehow different, or tensions being different, or things like that. So we'll just roll and see what the theme that is suggested is, and then we make that work by extrapolating how it could be that the representation of this nation is the way it is here. I seem to have run out of my wonderful cards here, so I'm going to use some waste paper that I use for note-taking, so I don't just throw it away. And I think we start off with a d12 roll to determine the main theme of the court of the Embassy of the Prosperity of Chandra. 7, paralysis, trapped in some kind of internal crisis. Well, as we determined in somewhat recent memory, at least, Ilona united the various kingdoms of the Commonwealth to resist the expansionist urges of the Prosperity of Chandra, and maybe that ripple effect and the presence of a counterweight now in the political geoscape causes this kind of paralysis on a more political level. However, it could also just be a local issue where the ambassador themselves is the reason for the paralysis, or maybe some misstep by the ambassador in the local political climate. So maybe we'll just roll a 50-50 here to see, is it global paralysis? Is the whole prosperity somewhat paralyzed and on the back foot, or is it local and it's just here and it's mainly centered around this embassy? 51 plus, it's global, below is local. 16, okay, so it's only a local thing, which means the ambassador somehow is involved and the reason for the paralysis. Local issues centered around the ambassador, which means we should probably figure out, well, a major figure of the court that might already give us a hint, or we also need to define this ambassador then. So major figure, d12. The heir apparent. Ha! I think I know what this is. The heir apparent of the opulence, the ruler of the decadent empire, the Prosperity of Chandra, has arrived in Coleraine and is messing things up for the ambassador and makes it incredibly hard to run this embassy, because this heir is creating a power differential in this mission of the embassy that just doesn't work. So it's an untouchable high noble, the heir apparent, who wants to go to this Coleraine to see what all the fuss is about, arrives here and makes things hard for the ambassador. I think that's what happened. The source of their power in the court, I mean, it's the heir apparent, but still we could get an idea of whether it's a classic buffoon or it's a really competent one. Really might change the dynamic. 12, they have the support of an important local faith. This is an in for Irwan, I think, and maybe also the reason why this heir apparent is here. Maybe that's some kind of phase that the heir is going through, where now the heir is going to want to touch base with the criminal deity of luck, the patron deity Rakshasa of Coleraine, and this relationship makes things very, very complicated for the ambassador, who kind of wants to keep their embassy out of the immediate attention of a creature like that. So that could be a thing. So the heir apparent is here to commune with Irwan, and the ambassador disapproves. Problems of the court, internal, well, besides the paralysis, of course. 11, someone got involved with a criminal organization, so I guess that's the contact for Jezebeth then into the embassy. So So that's Jezebel's inside person. So we know she has a connection to this embassy and potentially maybe isn't controlled by the embassy then, which is a different power dynamic. It's more the other way around. She influences parts of the embassy through her puppeteering and the hold she has over that someone that got involved with her organization. External conflict. 2. A royal advisor wants the court cut down to size. Okay. That reads like the inner circle of the surrogate wants to limit the influence of the prosperity and is taking steps against them. Now, let's still make an ambassador and let's give a name to our heir apparent as well. First off, what are they? I think since we're dealing with the prosperity, it is very, very likely to be a tiefling. I think everything that isn't a 10 or below on a die percent roll is a tiefling. Otherwise, we roll on this table. Okay, so the heir is a tiefling, or if we prefer, we can also call them hell-blooded. As I was thinking, maybe that could be more on brand for this world, so maybe we can label them hell-blooded now as the dominant version of tiefling in the prosperity of Chandra. If you have a better name, feel free to suggest it. Just a little bit of additional branding of Aina versus the classic D&D terms. Maybe I already went with rat folk and snake folk and bird folk for some of these. And maybe we can find something better for tiefling as well. Anyway, it's a tiefling and we want to have a name. We go back to Xanatar and to the naming table we've used before. We roll our die 6 for the gender and we roll our die percent for the name. 1 to 3 is female, 4 6 is male. 49 and female. Kishori is the heir apparent of the prosperity of Chandra and is here to commune with Irwan. Now we need an ambassador. Again, the whole song and dance, is it a tiefling? I think it is very likely, so we are doing the 10% rule again. 07, it's not a tiefling. What is it? Okay, time to break out our new origins table for the Coleraine campaign. What are you, ambassadorship? I was thinking watch me roll tiefling now again, but I rolled a 90, which makes it snake folk, so it's a Yuan-Ti type person. That is very interesting. What kind of name are we going with that then? How about some evil dragon names from this toolbox type of thing that somebody recommended to me? Die 20 roll. That's a 1. Ashlatar the Unkind. Is that a male Ashlatar or a female, by the way? That's a male. Okay. Nice. We flesh that out more as we come into contact with the embassy in play and maybe with Ashlatar or maybe with Kishori. And we move on to our second embassy of the Commonwealth, of the Elonate Commonwealth. So we're going through this whole song and dance again and hopefully we don't roll the same result. What is the main theme? 5. Resentment bitter at their rivals' crimes. Okay. That reads like the local representation of the Elonate Commonwealth is very bitter still against the prosperity of Chandra, and maybe also is the reason why currently the influence of the prosperity is being limited by the local government. Maybe the Elonate Commonwealth has the ear of the new surrogate and is acting against the tendrils of the prosperity sneaking into the city here, and due to the paralysis exerted upon the ambassador, upon Ashlatar the Unkind, it's working. So resentment, bitter at rivals, they act out against the prosperity presence in Coleraine. Major figure. 5, a spare heir? How does that work? We have, I think, decided that this is going to be an elected rulership in the Commonwealth. Well, on the other hand, the individual nations of the Commonwealth still have heirs, so maybe one of the main Commonwealth nations has sent the second son to be the ambassador in Coleraine. I somehow say son by default. Let's decide that alongside a name once we have an origin. So for now it's the second offspring. I think heir throws me off because I think like heir male, heir is female. Okay, origin of our spare heir is 80. It's an orc. So there is an honorable orc tribal or feudal nation in the Commonwealth. That's pretty cool. Now the question is, do we have orc names in here? We have half-orc names. That's good enough. So let's go with the half-orc names. Again, the 1 to 3 is the female. That is a female by the name of Ubada. And where does Ubada come from? Let us do city names specific here and make that the country name. And I'm just gonna do the 1 to 3, 4 to 6, roll the die 20 and check the table. Table 2, 5, Nerinthar. Ubada of Nerinthar. I like her already. That's the ambassador, who is agitating against the prosperity of Chandra, and who could blame her really? Source of their power, besides being the ambassador, the personal imposing nature of Ubada. 8. Everyone acknowledges their skill and brilliance. So we have a shrewd orc politician princess who is successfully pushing back against the prosperity of Chandra in Coleraine, which is an important location, especially due to the divine essence resource. Now, internal conflicts. 5. A danger exists in or near the court's own seat. Okay. Which makes me think the embassy building and location is threatened somehow. That is definitely something we should keep in mind for our future adventures. Maybe they somehow have a breakthrough to the underground, or maybe they're intentionally tunneling in there trying to find some devices, but they dug too deep again. This seems to be happening all the time. We don't need more than that right now. External conflicts we do need. 10. A reckless member has incurred a group's anger. Maybe they were being a bit self-righteous and pushy against the magical resource allocation guild and are now a bit at the outs, and while they're not cut off from the magical resource export and being able to buy it up for their kingdoms, they aren't getting nearly as much as they want to get. Maybe that's also why they're desperate enough to start tunneling down into forbidden reaches of Coleraine and messing something up here, which is why the embassy is currently threatened somehow. So they have pissed off the Divine Essence Control Guild, leading to desperation due to a reduction in quota. Result, they take risk to start tunneling into Colraine's depths and bad things happen. That is where the embassy building is now threatened somehow. And that, my friends, is the Elenate Commonwealth Embassy dealt with. So now we just need to think back to our cult, which we already have decided is a fractured cabal that seeks to control the secular world to destroy it, or maybe reawaken their dead gods and remake it in their image, that controls its members through dark cleric magic. Its leaders are insane by human standards. Maybe they're all like old lich-like undead original high priests of the old pantheon. And it has allies throughout the world. So locally, what does that mean? Is it directly, has it a sub-cabal that acts in Coleraine, or do we latch it into a different faction? I'm looking at our government at the Darajan assemblage here, and I still remember that a grand scheme has gone horribly wrong somehow for them. So maybe that's the in for the cult cabal to have some leverage. Question is, in what form do they appear here? Do they appear in a religious manner? Are they like a wealthy, well-connected family? Are they a crime syndicate? Do they operate like a business? That's 4 options. Let's roll a d4. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. 4. Okay, so they have a religious front. I mean, that does make sense to some extent. And I think it's frowned upon to preach the old pantheon, even though Viola is a member of the old pantheon, so maybe they co-opted the local worship of Viola. But we can figure it out. So we know they are a religious seeming organization here. So locally a temple. Let's give them a relations with the larger faith. So are they a strange splinter of an existing faith? Are they maybe even a sect that is an extreme version of the Rajan faith or Irvan worship or Viola worship? 5, populist, focusing on the poor lay believers. Okay, so I think this is the classic scenario where they are portraying themselves sort of as the healing church of the poor, and they are a corruption of the Viola healing church. They are appearing as the benevolent ones here, and they try to build like grassroots support, especially through channeling Viola, who is like the sole surviving member of the old pantheon and is tolerated in various aspects because she's a benevolent goddess, and by that maybe fostering more acceptance for also on a higher level than if you reach further enlightenment in a church. It's like, hey, actually there's also this old war god and the tinkerer and all of those. They're kind of good too, right? Shouldn't we bring them back? And that's how they kind of recruit and spread their influence and form like a church cult within the church. So they have an inner circle there that worships the old pantheon. A major figure, 11, a temple sorcerer. Okay, that is probably the Cabal's local leader. And that is what exactly? Let's give an origin again. It's a dwarf. I think I want an evil priest name for that one, so let's forego the dwarf and let's just roll the die 6 for the gender and the die 20 for the name. 5 male, 3 Balthon. Nice. Okay, source of Balthon's power in the court is what? 7, they're an expert at seduction and manipulation, a seductive dwarf. This is gonna be an interesting one. The shiniest beard in the 7 realms. Internal conflict is currently what? A vital ritual item or component has been lost. Okay. I'm noting down theft question mark. Maybe that is one of our future thief characters' contacts, or maybe even Thieves Guild that absconded with that, and that's a nice adventure hook as the Cabal tries to get it back. And the external conflict? 11, an outside cleric is trying to claim leadership. Maybe like a saintly, highly respected follower of Viola has arrived in Coleraine on some kind of pilgrimage and is disrupting the designs of the Cabal somehow, runs this as a front, and all of a sudden there's like a genuinely good person here, and that creates a bit of a problem. So let's again determine a origin. 57, a dark elf. Okay, wow. All right. What name do we go for here? I don't think we have. Well, we have Drow probably in Xanathars, but those names are a bit out there. I'd like to buy a Z. Ding, 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 ding. Oh, just regular elven names. Why not? Let's just go with regular elven names and make it then work for us. 59 and 1, that is Malquis. That actually sounds very good. So Malquis, she is a saintly pilgrim of Viola and respected church luminary, recently arrived to Coleraine, and she creates all sorts of problems for poor, quote unquote, poor Balthon, our local Cabal leader. So that is our 3 additional factions, and that leaves us with history of the factions to determine, local history to flesh out, and relationships between the factions to determine. There is a lot of stuff here that we have decided and determined. If you have any thoughts to that, anything to add, drop a comment and we'll do the rest next time. So thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you then, and bye for now.